I think business has to take a leading role in driving society to a more sustainable future. Business has the innovation power, the management talent, the financial capacity, and the reach into markets. In many ways, business by now, given its global reach, also can better manage the challenges that sustainability poses across country borders. So there's ample reasons for business to take the lead. It's clear that there is a good business case for sustainability now. The license to operate in society is at risk if you do not implement sustainability. And really, the future competitive position of your business depends on that sustainability to be implemented in your strategies. That's not the same as saying that business can do this alone. Absolutely not. Business must work closely together with governments, with the citizens, the consumers in the world, to make the changes that will lead to a more sustainable future. But business is clearly in the leading position now. Well, I think the current pandemic has shown to all citizens in the world how vulnerable society is to big shocks. Obviously, COVID-19 is now the shock that has come to every doorstep, every family, every company, every country. But we have to remember that the climate shock that is coming on the heels of this pandemic will be much bigger than the pandemic shock has already been. I hope that because this pandemic has made these shocks so personal to everyone, as you can see from my background, I am working from home. I've been doing that for the last 3 months. My family is far away. I hope every day that they are okay. And that makes a shock personal. I hope we can keep that energy, the understanding that we are in a vulnerable society up. And I hope that we can see that the climate risk poses much bigger risks of shocks than even the one we see now. So I think you now everywhere you go see we need to build back better. Everybody's talking about the great reset, the need to fundamentally change systems. And in that need to change systems, every time you look at it, climate poses the biggest risk to humanity that we now face. So yes, I see reasons why people would argue we cannot fight climate change now. We need to restore jobs. We need to work on the economy. But I can tell you one thing. If we do not fight climate change, the risk in the economy will be much higher. If we, on the other hand, do work on climate action, then you will see the job generation as a result of investments in renewable energy and other solutions to climate change will be much bigger than investments in old industries. So I think also in the recovery scenario from the pandemic, fighting climate change, positively moving towards a zero emission society will be a great benefit today in terms of jobs, tomorrow in no shocks to society. Yeah, I think there's probably not been any business leader prepared for the pandemic that now is striking us. I would dare to say that every country, every company, and probably every household was ill prepared for this shock. So I think the first thing we should do is understand what are these vulnerabilities that have been exposed by the pandemic? How have we structured our supply chain? What can we learn from a shock like this? And what can we do to avoid shocks in the future, or if they come, to be more resilient against them? I think the second big thing that we need to learn is to really integrate this into our risk management, into our disclosures, and into the conversations with our investors. Because only when we make these issues structurally part of the way we manage businesses, make decisions, explain these decisions to investors, and eventually get a lower cost of capital for making those better decisions, will we really be on top of it all. But most importantly, I think we need to keep an eye on the human factor, because what the pandemic has shown us, that it started with a bug somewhere in a country far away, and it became an integral threat to the way we live. We all work from home. Coming back to the office may never be the same as it was before. Our supply chains have exposed vulnerabilities. We begin to understand that the stress we put on nature is actually one of the main reasons why pandemics like this begin to emerge. We see that an enormous amount of people have lost their jobs. A large number of people have even lost their lives as a result of this pandemic. So what we see is one shock is not just a health shock, it's an economic shock, it's a human health shock, it's a livelihood shock. And so we need to begin to think much more holistically about what are the solutions that business and governments can put in place. It's not just climate change we need to fight climate change and create jobs. It's not just the healthcare system that we need to fix. We need to fix the healthcare system, but we also must reduce the stress on nature. So sustainability, it has always been about the integration of these many challenges, but it is now really clear that unless we look at sustainability on an integrated basis, we will not be able to avoid these shocks. Yeah, I think each company that wants to move to net zero has to do a three-step approach. First and foremost, it needs to map its current greenhouse gas emissions, and not just the ones in their own factory or their own operations, but the ones that are in scope one, i.e. in the raw materials coming in, as well as the emissions that are caused by their products or services by the people who use those products or services. So that's step one. Secondly, companies need to set ambitious targets. The 1.5 degree scenario as a target is now clear. That means that every company must set a target to be net zero greenhouse gas emissions by no later than 2050. And no later than 2050 actually means as soon as possible before 2050. So one of the things that I now see emerge in the international community is you begin to see a race to the top. A company sets a target to be net zero by 2050. The next one comes out saying, we will actually be net zero by 2040. The third one will then say, we will do it by 2039. So you'll see a race to the top, but you have to set a target and a clear point. The third step you need to do is to then create an action plan. How are we going to get to that net zero by 2050? And not only an action plan far away into the future, because 2050 is still 30 years away, but how are we going to halve the emissions in the next 10 years? Because only if you do that do you have a chance to get to zero by 2050. And then the fourth step is to actively disclose, i.e. collect the data and then disclose the data of how you are doing. You started with a certain emission level. How are you indeed now seeing the effects of your action plan over time drive down to that target? And that's what business does best, I know I've run businesses for a long time myself. It's very hard to get your mind around having to set a target. But once you set the target, put the actions against that target in place and measure the progress towards that target, business will always outperform and deliver its target sooner. So that's the invitation to any company. Understand your emissions, set a target, put in place an action plan, and measure and disclose your progress against that action plan. Yeah, I think achieving net zero by 2050 for the whole world, all industries, all countries, is going to be a massive challenge. I have long thought that it might be too hard a challenge to actually get to, but I'm actually beginning to get more optimistic. And in a strange way, as harsh as the pandemic has hit many countries around the world, I am getting hope out of the pandemic. If you see how fast countries were able to react, how within a matter of weeks, almost half the population of the world was working or being at home, not going to their work or their offices or wherever it may have been. If the pressure gets high, humanity can respond incredibly quickly. I think out of this pandemic and out of the further work that many people are now doing around this pandemic, it is clear that climate change is an even much bigger risk than this pandemic was. And therefore, I hope that with this shock now in our bodies, in our systems, we will able to see this bigger risk, to mobilize the solutions around it. And I'm getting big hope. You know, if I look at companies like BP, the British oil and gas company, Shell, and other oil and gas companies that have now also set net zero emission targets for 2050. If industries which are as deeply invested in the fossil fuel base as them, if they can do it, then I would argue there is no business in the world that cannot do it. I know some of your audience may not be there yet, but I'm also convinced if you look at these examples and how they lay out their plans to achieve it, if you think through the shock and the bigger shock that climate change will be that the pandemic has just exposed us all to, then I'm sure you will get the energy and the inspiration to put your plans together. And the more companies that put these plans together, the faster the race to the top, to the new competitive landscape will be, the faster we will achieve the target. So I'm not sitting here saying this is going to be easy. It won't. The energy system is massive. But I do think that humanity will find a way to respond fast enough. I really want to encourage the Polish industry and the businesses in the room today to take up this challenge. We have seen now how fast the world can respond. We have understood perfectly well what the challenge of climate change, of biodiversity loss, of inequality all poses on us. But if the businesses, and in this case the Polish businesses, put their best efforts forward, put the best innovative ideas to work, this is the time in which significant changes can be implemented. Your customers will want it because everybody has been touched by the pandemic and is ready to change. You will determine your competitive position of the future. And it's fantastic that collectively you are working on this agenda. I really hope that today's event will allow you to really get some inspiration and really put your best efforts forward. And I commit that as soon as travel is allowed again, and you may have a next event, I'll try to be in Poland myself and really look forward to engaging with all of you. Thank you.